So, yeah, I'm going to talk about this very hot debate of native apps versus mobile web. And I know it's something that you guys have probably read a lot about, and in fact probably have very strong feelings about. So I wanted to share sort of my thoughts on some of the data, and also where I think technology and economics might influence how this market evolves. So I suspect a lot of you saw this graph. It caused a lot of chatter when it was initially shown. Flurry published it. And essentially, in June of this year, they published it. It caused a huge amount of flurry in our office, and made the claim that the number of daily minutes spent with native apps had actually passed the number of daily minutes with web consumption. Not just mobile web, but all web. We were just, oh my God, could that be true? But it turns out, actually, it's not true. It's been since debunked. So TechCrunch probably said it best. They said that it was like taking a survey at a comic book convention and then announcing that there was more time spent reading comics than reading all books combined. What they had done was they had compared all cell phone users, right? 60% of which don't even own a smartphone, with their data set. And their data set, by definition, is native apps. They can't see you unless you're a native app. That said, I think the data is actually still interesting, right? I think it's interesting that in a year, the number of minutes spent in native apps doubled from 40 minutes to roughly 80 minutes. And I also think it's interesting that both the amount of time we're spending on the web and in mobile has just gone up, right? Both have grown. We spent more in both. At the same time, they published this graph, and this is quite interesting. This is based on their data set alone. So this is just, of those 80 so minutes, what are we doing in that time? And overwhelmingly, we're gaming and we're doing social networking. And it's not just the total number of minutes, it's also the amount of engagement, the frequency with these type of apps, which is really dominating native apps. This is ComScore's data a month later in August, and I think it's a good pie chart, right? So they just looked at all sources of traffic, and essentially roughly 93% is from computers, and 6.8% are from mobile and tablet and other. So really what this tells you is that the opportunity for growth, as amazing as it seems right now, we've barely scratched the surface, right? We can just barely scratch the surface of where we're going. And I think nothing says that better than this graph. This was shared by Mary Meeker at the Web 2.0 talk last month, and if you haven't seen this on YouTube, I highly recommend it. She's always excellent, and she was just on fire at Web 2.0. You kind of wanted to write down every word she had to say. And she published this, and it shows the adoption rate for this first 6 quarters from launch. Okay, so this is not at the same time. It's the first 6 quarters that the iPod was live, and that's the lowest curve. And then the iPhone, and then the iPad is the blue curve. I've just never seen anything like that. It's an astounding curve. And I think it actually tells us something quite profound, which is that I don't know that anyone would look at the data and not believe that tablets are on track to be larger than the PC market, right? In fact, I think that's going to happen sooner than we can even imagine. And so I think it's interesting to look at, so what's happening with our early adopters, because that's really where we are right now. We're very nascent, right? Early adopters of the tablet, and what we see is that it's dominated by people that are aged 25 to 44, and that in fact owners of tablets 13 to 17 and over 65 are fairly small pieces of pie still. Also, and again, not a surprise, but it's affluent homes that own tablets. Again, tablets really are dominated by iPads. We might as well say iPads. And it's household incomes of 75K, 100K plus, right, that own these devices today. So it's interesting in the kids market because a lot of the data I'm showing you is not for kids, it's for adults. And so we have an extra challenge that we have to extrapolate this data and what does it mean for kids, right? What is it going to mean for kids when every kid does own a tablet? And when tablets are more prevalent in less affluent homes, right? So to be somewhat creative. That said, Play Science Lab actually did publish this report last month, Mobile Playground, and what they did is they went to 531 parents of 2 to 13-year-olds, and they just asked what kind of access those children had to devices. So they asked how the access they had to smartphones, iPods, and tablets. essentially what they said is they took their 531 and extrapolated the US and said 75% of children aged 2 to 13 have access to smartphones. Right? They may not own one, but they have access to it. And about half of US kids have access to an iPod Touch, and about 25% have access to a tablet. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, can we take pictures of your slides?
Yes.
You know what,
Okay,
there's a 4-page report that you can download for this,
Oh.
but even the researcher says there may be some issues with the methodology
But I'm also happy to
behind,
share my
behind
slides.
this.
Okay.
And I'm happy to, anyone who's interested in the slide deck
Thank you.
itself, are welcome.
Sorry for interrupting.
No, please, no, interrupt. This is Desert Magic, that's sort of the point. So, I think, I'm dubious of this data. I mean, much like the Flurry data, the one thing I learned with Flurry data, which I sort of immediately thought was true, and was somewhat taken aback when I realized it was false, is to be skeptical of data. And I'm actually skeptical of this data. If you look at penetration, and I'll talk about penetration of smartphones in the market, I think it's unrealistic that 75% of kids have access to smartphones, where the data just doesn't add up. That said, I think it's still very interesting, right? In some ways it justifies what we know, which is that, okay, kids don't own these devices, but they're using them, but parents are handing to them. And in fact, Playground Lab asked parents, so why are you giving these to their kids? And again, not a surprise, Dr. Moose, Carolyn has talked about this, right? You're waiting in the line, you're traveling, it's to entertain them with these things. In fact, they said the educational benefits at this point were secondary to that. And so I think it makes sense, because one of the interesting things is notice for smartphones, as you get older, your access goes down. And that makes sense given that, right, as your kids get older, you need to distract them in line less. So, and also notice that right now the amount of both ownership and access. So, and I should point out that, so the blue curve is the access. So for instance, for the smartphone, 10 to 13-year-olds, 65% have access, but 33% own. So the black bar is actually, they actually own their own device. In fact, it's somewhat dubious that 2 to 5-year-olds, 6% own their own smartphone, but could be, right, could be. So if you look at smartphones today, of cell phones, 43% are smartphones. The more interesting piece of data is last month, for the first time, smartphone sale outpaced cell phone sale, which is incredible. And if you look at smartphones, the breakdown of smartphones, right, 43% are Android. It's just an astounding lead, I think. Second, quite distant place is 28%, which are iPhones. And I think that, I talked about that I think we're not far from every kid having a tablet in their hands. And one of the reasons I believe this very passionately is because of the competition. And if you look at things like this, right, the Kindle, the Amazon Fire. This is a picture of the Amazon Fire. Just to give some perspective, right? So it does not go on sale until November 15th, and it's now on track to have 2.5 million pre-orders. So last April, the iPad had 300,000 pre-orders, and in the first month sold 1 million. And iPad 2 this March, in its first month, sold roughly 2.5 million. So if this consumer demand continues, it's already surpassed the iPad, and it will easily compete or exceed the iPad 2. Right? And that's just cost. Right? That's just really a factor of cost. In fact, Kindle is subsidizing it in order to have that competitive cost, where they're losing money on the device. And this makes sense. In fact, the other thing that I think is true is I think it's very soon, much sooner than we think, that these devices are just free. These devices don't cost anything. This is a graph that shows different price points over time of the e-Kindle. And I mean, no one has to look at this to see that it's going to zero, right? It's going to zero. And that's not a surprise when you look at things like this. So this is Jeff Bezos at a press conference for the Fire. And he showed this graph, which I think is just one of the most amazing graphs I've ever seen, right? So the yellow curve is physical book sales, and the orange is ebooks. Right? So it's not a surprise that Amazon does not care about the cost of the hardware, right? They're banking on commoditizing content and ebooks. And it's so telling that even today, right, you can buy two kinds of Kindles. You can buy one that's ad-supported, so when you power it down, you get an ad. Or one that costs a little bit more, so that's $79, one that's $115, that's ad-free. And I think literally we're months away, if Jesse Shell was here, I would do a little prediction, that Amazon Prime customers, that these are just free for them. And the hardware cost doesn't matter.
So, Krista, did you see the announcement today?
Which announcement?
Today?
Nook announced a new tablet to compete with the Fire.
Yeah, so great. So Robin is just saying that Nook just announced a tablet to compete with the Fire. One of the things, I think competition, and actually something that just, I can't tell you how excited I'm about. I was so excited when I read it, so if you haven't read about it, you must go Google it. And I don't even know how to pronounce it, and I asked many people smarter than me in this room, and I'm delighted to say they had no clue either how to pronounce it, but it's the Aakash, it's the Akash. Wait, Scott's nodding, so Scott, I didn't ask you, clearly you know, the Akash. And what this is the coolest thing ever, right? So the Indian government has contracted this UK company, DataWin, to create a very low cost, $60 tablet. They're going to subsidize it to $35. And by the end of 2012, it will be in 10 to 12 million children's hands, students' hands, across India. Right? The government sort of realized that the problems they have with education, they just can't begin to solve. And so they're sort of banking on that this is a solution, right? That it's something they can afford, they can put in a lot of kids' hands, and hopefully it will just raise the education level. I just think it's so profound. I thought that it reminds me of something that Mary Meeker said in her talk, which is that 85% of the world today has access to the wireless grid. Right? So more people have access today to the wireless grid than have access to electricity. We're just in amazing times. And she said something that actually gave me chills. She went on to say, when people look back at this era that we're living in now, they'll say this was the time people got empowered by mobile devices. It was very exciting to be all of us players in such a market. So if hardware, and believe me, and hardware is going to be free, what does that mean for software? Right? What does that mean for apps and mobile web? And here's what I think. I think that what it means is that distribution matters. And I think that the force to deliver software cheaply to a lot of people is going to be a winning strategy, right? So today, we are in this situation where we kind of have a locked market, right? Apple takes 30%. Really, as an entrepreneur, there's not really another gig in town. I don't think that's sustainable. And I think this is a screenshot of the Google Chrome web, and obviously they have plenty of problems, but I think it's not a coincidence that they're only taking 5%, right? Facebook's going after this market. There's going to be a lot of pressure to find ways to make mobile web work because it solves distribution. And it's funny, when I was thinking about this, it reminded me of an article I read many years ago, and so I went and looked it up, I went and dug it out. And I was delighted to see that Warren is quoted in this article, right? So he says, nobody would have thought those were the golden days. Now we're looking back and we're saying, wow, what happened? So who knows what he's referring to? Does anyone know what this quote is referring to, or when it's from? Does Warren even know when it's from?
The CD-ROM days?
Essentially. It's actually more specific than that. It's actually about educational software. So educational software in 2000 was a $500 million business. And in fact, people were estimating that it was only just begun. And yet in 5 years, it was essentially decimated. And the reason is very simple, right? All of a sudden, there were a lot of learning and game sites on the internet. So what the web did was deliver much lower quality, right? We know this now, not Oregon Trail, right? Much lower quality, but they solved distribution. We really were willing to take a hit on quality to have distribution, right? And I think that's something to think about as we move forward. So, and I actually should say that a couple of things, which is that I certainly think, I think there's a drive to free up most apps, so sort of being device, store, and platform specific. I also think that's meaningless until someone can have a business model that's viable. There's not another viable business model today. I also think, right, there's 400,000 apps in the Apple Store today. There's been 10 billion downloads, right? It's very hard to imagine that will go away. And in fact, I don't think it will go away. I think there will always be demand for premium, high quality, get every bit and bob, right? That kind of really intense performance. If nothing else, the EAs of the world with the next NFL game are going to be willing to do it for every platform to really eke out all the performance from that native. But I don't know or believe, truthfully, that it's sustainable for sort of more broad distribution of software. I think, and I'm not sure it just will be mobile web. I think more things will emerge that are something that we even haven't seen yet that get us closer to a native experience but still allow that sort of cross-platform distribution. So with that, I want to just talk a little bit, we're in the same place, right? We have a website. So I didn't introduce myself, but I work with an amazing group of people in Boulder, Colorado. We were a company that was bought by Disney a few years ago, and we took what we did and brought it to Disney.com, and we run a section of Disney.com called Create. And it's two things. It's creativity's tools for kids. They can create stories and animations and drawings. That's really not what makes it interesting, right? That's interesting. That's not what makes it interesting. What makes it interesting is the platform for kids to publish. And then social tools for a safe way to engage around that. And that's much more interesting, because the reality is when you create something, you absolutely want to share it, right? And so I'm very thrilled to share with you guys, I've been sort of excited to share, particularly with you as colleagues, that this August we've been live for 2 years. In the first year we had 1 million pieces of art and comics and animations created and saved. And this August we had 10 million. So we passed the 10 million. And actually what this slide is we published that milestone on the website. We said, hey, we passed 10 million. And we had thousands of submissions like these where kids really owned that milestone. They really said, wow, look what we did. Hey, kick it up a notch. Let's do 20 million. And they're really excited. So, right, how do we lose that? I mean, clearly I think we're going to tablets. I think these things will be relegated to very specific, domain-specific uses. So what does that mean? What does that mean for a site that so depends on the sort of amazing social engagement that you can get on the web? So what I will show you is that we decided to do a quite radical thing. And most of our site is in Flash, right? Most of our site is ActionScript. And this is our site today. And so just none of it works. And so we took the painful, about 200,000 lines of ActionScript, and not all of it, but a lot of it has been rewritten in HTML. And we've done that just to get cross-platform. So we sort of just took the plunge and we threw a lot away. And so now, and this is actually live. It's soft launched to an undisclosed, this is the new site, soft launch. It is live today. And in 2 or 3 weeks, it's actually going to be live for here, but in 2 or 3 weeks, it will actually be live. And what's interesting about this site, right, is now I can look at it on my iPad, I can look at it on my iPhone. And what's important about that is that, right, so here it is on my iPhone, is that no matter what device I'm on, I can look at what I've created, I can show my mother what I've created, I can see what you've created, we can vote on it, we can add comments, we can share it. Now what we haven't done has ported the apps. So the truth is the kind of rich app experience we're providing on the web, is unique to Flash, right? And the only way we can get it is doing native. So in the short term, our strategy is if you go to the apps on the web, we will detect that you're on a computer, and we'll give you the Flash app. If you're on an iPad and you click on it, you'll actually go, in this case on an iPad, to the Apple Store and you'll purchase it. The difference is, or not the difference, but the thing that's important is regardless of where you create that drawing or animation or picture, it will get saved to your portfolio. You can publish it once moderated, it can be shared. So that's at least kind of the strategy, the short-term strategy that we're taking. And I think, that's important. And I just want to end by sharing this last little piece of content that I think is really extraordinary. So Yorkie Rules is a very active member of the Create community, and when he got his 1,000th fan, he wrote this letter. He submitted this and published it, and he wrote, and I will not read all of it, but let me read a little bit of it. Dear fans and artists, I still remember the day I drew my first drawing on Create. I logged in for the first time. I opened my profile the first time. Still remember it. I know that's a little cheesy, but I realize now I've inspired more than 1,000 people. I feel really good. I feel my art is not only just rated by fans or other artists, I feel they're actually looked at and the person liked it. He says other things, and then he finishes by saying, thank you to all these members here on Create reading this. You are all artists. Just by drawing a simple picture, you changed my life. Thank you guys for making the 12 years of my life count. And right, so that's what I don't want to lose, right? With having an isolated app that you use without being able to publish and share. So, I don't think we have a perfect answer, but that's certainly what we're striving for. So anyways, thank you.